All right, everyone. Well, welcome back, and we are very luckily joined this morning by veteran commentator of combat sports and professional wrestling, Jimmy Smith. So, Jimmy, first, thank you very much for joining us today. The first thing I want to get into is you've always made clear in your coverage of the sport of mixed martial arts that you are first and foremost a fan. And as we're heading into a massive card in Abu Dhabi with Oliveira and Makhachev and Peter Yan and Sean O'Malley, the Sean O'Malley fight to me is particularly intriguing when you consider the risk that is relative to both guys as taking this fight as a career move. I just wanted to get your thoughts on the fight as a fan of that matchup.
Well, part of it is, you're right. It's the questions make a fight interesting, not the answers. Questions make it interesting. The question is, this will be the biggest step up in Sugar Sean O'Malley's career by a lot. Petr Yan is taking a gigantic risk. If he loses to Sean O'Malley, he tumbles really far down the rankings in a really competitive division. I put 135 just below 155 in terms of depth in the UFC. And so both guys are taking a risk for different reasons. Sean O'Malley can lose without a ton of blowback, without a ton of problems, right? He's a big underdog. But, when he talks about, man, I want to get to that Conor McGregor level of success. I want to be, the biggest name in the sport. Everybody who's a crossover star, Ronda Rousey, Conor McGregor, anybody you can think of who has been on the Wheaties box, in their first, 5 or 6 fights, 7 fights, they looked absolutely dominant. They just crushed the competition before getting to that next level and doing well there. And, he's already got a loss to Marlon Vera with no shame in that. He's at the top of the division, but I don't know if he can afford another one with the career trajectory he wants to have. So I think he's taking a bigger risk than people realize.
Jimmy, obviously this was the first week, your first full week not being an employee of WWE, and I'm sure over the last year and a half you've made some great memories and experiences with the WWE. I'm sure WrestleMania was a wonderful experience, but I'm sure you sort of had to a little bit of time maybe to reflect now on the experience working for them. And I did hear you say earlier on the week that you're fine. You didn't expect working for them, so you're okay. It's no big loss for you. So how do you sort of look back on your time with the WWE? And is there anything that you would have done differently?
No, not one thing, man. It was a great experience. It was, awesome working for, a massive company that I got to travel with, and I got to call, these amazing, huge pay-per-views like WrestleMania 2 days. It was 77,000 a day for 2 days. It's unbelievable. The scale, the size, the way everything worked. It was an incredible experience. I wouldn't change a thing. I really wouldn't. People kind of expect this kind of, emotional letdown on my part. Not at all. I had a great time doing it, and it allowed me to step out of my comfort zone in a huge way. The commentary there is very, very different than doing play-by-play in the fight world. So it was a lot of fun, man. I wouldn't change a thing.
For sure. So, look, Jimmy, there's oftentimes that there is a lot of crossover in fans between professional wrestling and mixed martial arts, and even sometimes with the fighters themselves, as we saw DC quite recently as a special guest referee. So I wanted to know, what's the biggest difference and similarity between fans of the WWE and fans of MMA?
Man, fans of the WWE are from all stripes, right? It was big when I was a fan when I was a kid. In the 80s. So, my age, that's mid-40s. When I was a kid, there were fans my dad's age, from who remember, the early days of, Gorgeous George and Bruno Sammartino and stuff like that. So the fan base, the history of the fan base, meaning you kind of inherited a love for the WWE and professional wrestling. There was a lot more of that. MMA started when I was in the United States, when I was in high school. So it doesn't go past me as an adult. WWE went past me as an adult, went past my dad as an adult. It's been around for a long time. Almost compared to like the history of boxing. It just goes way beyond any one person. So the WWE has that. And it's similar to MMA in the loyalty of the fan base to the product. It's unbelievable how dedicated they were to the events and to the performers and everything. It's really incredible to see.
Jimmy, someone like myself, I grew up an avid fan of the WWE, and I was a big wrestling fan. And, good part of my childhood was the WWE. To now someone who is, really entrenched in the MMA world, I'm really interested to know, what was the biggest difference you found, besides obviously the physical combat aspect, of WWE and MMA, of working and commentating for the WWE compared to commentating and working in MMA?
It really wasn't that different in terms of the actual matches, and people have a misunderstanding about the WWE in terms of the way the matches work. Man, they're really going at it in a lot of cases. They're taking huge physical risks, and I've said a lot. I'm glad I got the commentary side of it. As old as I am, when I was in my mid 40s when I started, and I saw them take bumps. I was like, I couldn't take a bump like that. Maybe when I'm in my 20s, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm fine. I was watching stuff going, I can't believe they're walking after that. They took these massive bumps and all this stuff, and also they're so good at, much like a combat sport, kind of you get drawn in completely into the product. It's kind of the way it works is you become part of the product. And that's how the commentary was different, in that, it's a show and I'm part of the show and part of the product as a commentator, in a way that is kind of separate in MMA, where in MMA, there is the production side of it, the guys with the cameras and all that stuff. And then there are the fighters in there, and the commissioner is the one that makes the fight happen. And those are two separate sides. In the WWE, there are no two separate sides. It's all together. We're all making a product together. And that was a big difference. A lot of fun.
For sure. So, Jimmy, look, we've had the pleasure of having your old broadcast partner, the great Mike Goldberg, on the show about 6 months ago. And Mike had nothing but nice things to say about you, man. And we asked Mike about his deal and how he got presented to it by the WWE in 2005, and how that is something that, he would still love to do today. How do you think Mike Goldberg could transition to the WWE or professional wrestling as a whole?
Oh, I think he'd do great. I really would. I think he'd do fantastic. So it's he's got the voice for it. He has the play-by-play experience. Something I had virtually none of when I started with the WWE. I wasn't a play-by-play guy. He has years of play-by-play, and he has the presence and the voice and all those things to carry a broadcast in a different way than I did. As kind of on the analyst side, the technical side, he would get it way more on the entertainment and broadcast side. He would very much be part of that. I think he'd do a great job.
Jimmy, something we've seen more and more recently, of late, is fans becoming increasingly critical of commentary, which, from my perspective, it's always sort of been around, but has really ramped up in the last few years. Do you think that as the fans become more and more educated on the sport, they expect more from the commentators, or do you think there are another reason for this increase in sort of criticism towards commentary?
That certainly could be. Is that fans get more educated? They just notice a lot more. Mistakes live forever, and that could be a part of it. Also, you have a lot more commentators. A three-man booth in the UFC is normal now. It's almost always a three-man booth. That used to be rare. It used to be mostly a two-man, and then occasionally there'd be a three-man booth. So there are more people doing it. There are more cooks in the kitchen. There are more errors and mistakes as you add more people to a broadcast. And I think that is part of it too. And also, I like so-and-so, I don't like so-and-so. I like this person's style. I don't like that person's style. Commentary is one of those things where if you name me any commentator on the planet, I can find someone who hates him. I can find someone who loves him and thinks they're the most amazing thing ever. When you put, once again, 3 commentators in a booth, 2 people in a desk, 1 person backstage, you're going to find somebody you can't stand and don't want anything to do with it. So it used to be it was Goldie and Rogan, and that was it. They didn't throw in anybody. There wasn't anybody else talking. You either liked Goldie and Rogan or you didn't. Now you got 3 people at the desk and all these other parts in which you can find all these flaws if that's what you're looking for. So I think they've added a lot of cooks to the kitchen, metaphorically speaking, when it comes to commentary.
So, Jimmy, I saw you say early on in your start in the WWE that you had to do quite a bit of research on the wrestlers there and coming into the business, and how that was sort of, a big deal in becoming a play-by-play commentator, particularly in an industry that you hadn't really dealt with a lot before. But how was that initial experience coming into the WWE?
In terms of the diving into all the research?
Yeah.
Oh my God, it was unbelievable. It was unreal because, an MMA fighter at the top of their game, 3 fights a year is a lot. It's a lot. I can teach you the history of a particular fighter in 10 minutes if I sit you down and you're paying attention. There were storylines, and they were this person's tag partner for a while, and that there were more storylines and things to learn in 6 months to WWE than there were in 10 years of a fighter's career. Fighter might switch teams twice, 3 times. This is no, then they broke up with this faction and that faction and the story, and then this and that. There was just so much more going on, and you had to know so much more of it because it wasn't just what I can. Wins and losses are easy or whatever, but they aren't the story of professional wrestling. You have to know the background behind it and everything. And so that was very different than doing like the research for, a fight where what's the record, how they do against so and so, what are their techniques. It's easy to do. WWE just is so much deeper, and there's so much more to it.
Jimmy, look, man, last one from us. We don't want to keep you too long because your time's valuable, man. And so we just last one from us, man. We appreciate your time. But something I want to ask you and finish on is, is this one fighter that you can think of who was integral to building the sport and really developing, the fan base over the years that has somewhat been forgotten by fans? Do you think?
Frank Shamrock. Frank Shamrock, and partly because he's on the outs with UFC, right? He's not in the Hall of Fame. He was the inaugural, what we would call now, light heavyweight champion. He was middleweight at the time. He was the first mixed martial artist, man. He was the first one that you saw and went, okay, a modified set of his skill set would work today. You couldn't pluck him in the time machine and he would, there are things that he would need to work on, really undersized for the vision, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But he was the first one where you go, okay, with what he had, tweak a couple things, and you have a modern mixed martial artist. And I can't say that about, it's almost no one in that era had the skill set where they would even be somewhat competitive today. Frank Shamrock was, and a lot of people don't know. Frank Shamrock versus Tito Ortiz was like the gold standard of fights when I started in the late 90s. You had to know Tito Ortiz, Frank Shamrock. Oh my God, look at that fight. Da-da-da. And a lot of fans today haven't seen it at all. Don't even know it. So I think Frank is definitely one of those unfortunately forgotten fighters in MMA and UFC history.
Jimmy, it's been a pleasure, man. I really appreciate that, even on your Instagram, you're interacting and doing those live videos and, interacting with guys like us. So we really appreciate it, man. And we look forward to what's next for you. Can't wait to see it. And we'd love to have you on again. We really appreciate your time, man.
Anytime. Thanks for doing it, guys. You have a good one. Appreciate you.
You too. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Jimmy.